You ever notice how the quiet ones are always the ones nobody really sees, until it's too late to pretend they're invisible? The clang of iron plates echoed through the sealed gym, sharp and rhythmic, like a heartbeat made of steel, 45-pound plates slamming onto racks, boots scuffing across rubber flooring. The low hum of conversation layered with the hiss of breath under strain, and in the middle of it all, unnoticed by almost everyone, Arthur Hale moved a mop across the floor in slow, deliberate strokes, his worn sneakers whispering against the surface, his gray uniform plain, unmarked, blending into the background of a place built for men who stood out, not men who disappeared. He kept his head slightly lowered, not in submission, but in habit, the kind that comes from years of knowing exactly where to stand so no one looks twice. And the young operators didn't look twice, not at first. Their attention locked on mirrors and metrics, on reps and performance, on proving something to each other in a room that thrived on dominance and precision. Near the center rack, Petty Officer Ryan Cole dropped a barbell with a heavy thud, the sound cutting through the air as he straightened, chest rising with controlled breaths, sweat tracing sharp lines down his arms, and his eyes flicked briefly toward the old man pushing the mop near the edge of the lifting platform, just long enough to register him, just long enough to dismiss him. Arthur didn't react, didn't glance up, didn't adjust his pace. The mop gliding in steady arcs as if the chaos around him followed rules only he understood, and, for a moment, the contrast hung there, quiet and invisible, an old man cleaning up after warriors who believed they were the center of everything. Across the room, a younger operator misstepped during a lift, nothing dramatic, just a slight imbalance, the bar shifting enough to draw a sharp exhale and a few muttered curses, the kind of small disruption that usually passed unnoticed in a place like this. But Arthur's eyes lifted just slightly, not alarmed, not surprised, just aware, as if he had already anticipated it before it happened. He adjusted his path without breaking rhythm, giving the operator just enough space, just enough distance, his movements economical, precise, almost instinctive, and then he returned to the floor, to the quiet, to the role everyone had already decided he played. The air carried the scent of rubber, metal, and effort, thick but familiar, and Arthur breathed it in without reaction, as if he had stood in harsher places, as if this was nothing more than background noise compared to something far away and long ago. Ryan watched him again, this time a little longer, a faint smirk forming, not out of cruelty exactly, but out of the easy confidence of someone who had never had his assumptions challenged, someone who believed the world was exactly what it looked like on the surface, and to him, Arthur Hale was just a janitor, another invisible piece of the base, another man who existed to clean up after those who mattered. Arthur reached the edge of the main platform and paused just briefly, the mop resting against the floor as he shifted his grip, and for a fraction of a second, the collar of his faded shirt pulled slightly to the side, just enough to reveal a glimpse of something beneath the fabric, a dark line of ink along the side of his neck, old, blurred, and almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it. But no one was looking, not yet, and the gym carried on, loud, focused, unaware, the kind of place where the most important things could stand right in front of you and still go completely unseen. Ryan Cole let the silence stretch just long enough to turn into attention. Then he clapped his hands once, sharp and loud, drawing a few glances from the other operators nearby as he stepped off the platform and walked straight toward Arthur with the easy swagger of someone who had never been told to slow down, his boots leaving faint marks on the rubber floor that Arthur had just cleaned. And when he stopped a few feet away, he looked down at the old man like he was inspecting a piece of equipment that did not belong in the room. You planning to polish the whole place 1 inch at a time, or is this your version of a workout? Ryan said, his tone light but edged, the kind of humor that always had a target, and a couple of the younger men nearby chuckled without fully committing, their eyes flicking between Ryan and Arthur, waiting to see how it would land. Arthur did not answer right away. He simply finished the slow pass of the mop, guiding it to the edge of the mat with a steady hand before lifting it slightly and turning it back, his movements unhurried, controlled, as if the question had not been important enough to interrupt what he was doing. I asked you something, Ryan pressed, stepping a little closer, the faint scent of sweat and detergent mixing in the air between them. And Arthur finally looked up, his pale blue eyes calm, almost distant. Settling on Ryan for just a moment before drifting back to the floor. "Just doing my job," he said, his voice low and even, the words simple, without any edge, without any attempt to push back. And that, more than anything, seemed to irritate Ryan, because there was nothing there to push against. Ryan exhaled through his nose and gave a short laugh, shaking his head as he turned slightly toward the others. "You hear that, guys? This is high-level operational cleaning right here," he said, gesturing toward Arthur with an open hand as if presenting him, and a few more laughs followed, louder this time, the tension loosening into something easier, something more comfortable for them. Arthur kept moving, the mop gliding back across the same stretch of floor Ryan had just stepped on, erasing the marks without comment, without acknowledgement, and for a second, it felt like the room had split into two different rhythms, one loud and sharp and eager to prove something, the other quiet and steady and completely uninterested in being seen. Near the far wall, Lieutenant Mark Reyes had been watching the exchange without making it obvious, his posture relaxed, one hand resting on a rack, but his eyes sharper than the rest, tracking small details the others missed. And when Ryan shifted again, reaching out to tap the handle of the mop with his foot in a casual, dismissive nudge, Arthur adjusted his grip slightly, not pulling back, not reacting, just absorbing the interruption like it was part of the environment. "Careful," Ryan said with a grin. "Would not want you slipping, old man." And Arthur paused just long enough to look at him again, not offended, not defensive, just present. And in that brief moment, as his shoulder turned and the fabric of his collar shifted under the movement, the edge of that faded tattoo showed a little more clearly along the side of his neck, a dark curve of ink that did not belong to any standard unit marking. Something older, something unofficial, and Reyes felt a subtle tightening in his chest as his eyes locked onto it. Not because he fully understood it yet, but because something about it felt wrong in a way that was too precise to ignore, like a detail that did not fit the story everyone else had already decided was true. And while the laughter around Ryan faded back into the normal noise of the gym, Reyes kept watching, his expression unchanged, his mind already moving, already questioning, already beginning to pull at a thread that the rest of the room had not even noticed existed. Ryan's grin lingered a moment longer before he finally stepped back, satisfied with the reaction he had pulled from the room. But Arthur did not follow him with his eyes, did not track him the way most people would after being singled out. Instead, he lowered the mop again and resumed the same slow, even motion, the water catching the overhead lights in faint streaks that disappeared as quickly as they formed. And for a few seconds the noise of the gym reclaimed everything, plates clanging, voices overlapping, sneakers squeaking against rubber, the rhythm of controlled exertion filling the space as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But across the room, Lieutenant Mark Reyes had not moved, his attention still fixed, not on Ryan anymore, but on that small, incomplete glimpse of ink he had just seen, his mind replaying it in fragments, the curve, the thickness of the line, the way it sat slightly behind the ear and dipped toward the collar, not a standard placement, not a regulation mark, and definitely not anything you would expect on a base employee whose job was to keep floors clean and equipment organized. Reyes shifted his weight subtly, pushing off the rack as he took a few casual steps closer, careful not to draw attention, his expression neutral, almost bored, but his eyes sharper now, searching for another angle, another confirmation. Something that would either dismiss the thought or lock it into place. Arthur moved again, adjusting the bucket with a quiet scrape, and as he turned, the fabric at his neckline pulled just enough for the tattoo to reveal itself more fully for a fraction of a second, a dark, weathered symbol that looked less like decoration and more like a mark that had been carried for a long time. Something deliberate, something earned in a way that did not need explanation, and Reyes felt that same tightening again, stronger this time, because now he recognized the pattern, not completely, not with full clarity, but enough to trigger something buried in memory. A briefing, a redacted file, a passing mention during a training cycle that most people had forgotten the moment they left the room. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak without raising his voice, and Arthur sensed him before he said anything. Lifting his gaze slightly as Reyes approached, their eyes meeting for a brief, steady moment that held just a fraction longer than normal, Not confrontational, not friendly, just aware. You have been working here long? Reyes asked, his tone casual, almost offhand. But there was a precision behind it, a careful choice of words, and Arthur considered the question for a second, not because it was difficult, but because he seemed to weigh how much of an answer it deserved. Long enough, he replied, his voice unchanged, the same quiet steadiness that gave nothing away, and Reyes nodded once, as if that was exactly what he expected, though it told him almost nothing, or maybe more than it should have, behind them. Ryan's voice rose again, calling out to someone across the room, already moving on, already bored with the interaction, the moment dismissed as easily as it had been created, but Reyes did not turn toward him, his focus anchored on the man in front of him, on the detail that did not fit, on the growing sense that the story everyone else saw was missing something essential. Arthur dipped the mop back into the bucket, the water rippling outward in soft concentric circles, and as he wrung it out, with a slow twist of his hands, Reyes noticed something else, not in the tattoo this time, but in the movement itself, the efficiency, the control, the absence of wasted effort, the kind of motion that did not come from cleaning floors but from years of doing things where precision mattered in ways most people never understood, and that was when the doubt shifted, not into certainty yet, but into something heavier, something that demanded to be followed, because men like Arthur Hale did not just appear in places like this without a reason, even if that reason had been buried long enough for everyone else to stop looking. The question lingered between them for a moment longer than it should have, not because of the words themselves, but because of everything that was left unsaid behind them, and Arthur did not offer anything more. He simply lifted the mop again and turned slightly, continuing his slow path along the edge of the platform as if the conversation had already reached its natural end. Reyes watched him for another second, then let out a quiet breath through his nose, his mind no longer scanning for confirmation but now actively pulling at memory, trying to match that fragment of ink to something real, something documented, something that had once carried weight. And as he stepped back, giving Arthur space, the noise of the gym seemed to dull just a little, like his focus had shifted inward, isolating details the rest of the room ignored. He had seen that shape before, not on a wall, not in a handbook, but in a briefing that had not lasted long enough for questions, a slide that had appeared and disappeared with minimal explanation, a symbol tied to operations that were never discussed openly, units that did not exist on paper, names that were never spoken outside controlled rooms, and the more he tried to dismiss it, the more it refused to be dismissed. Across the gym, Ryan was already back at the rack, loading another bar with practiced ease, his laughter blending with the others as if nothing of consequence had happened, his world still simple, still clear, divided neatly between those who belonged and those who did not, and Arthur, to him, still sat firmly in the second category. Reyes turned away from Arthur and walked toward the far wall, pulling a phone from his pocket with a movement that looked routine, casual, but his thumb hovered over the screen for a fraction of a second before dialing. The hesitation not from uncertainty, but from the awareness that once he made this call, whatever this was would stop being just a passing thought. The line rang. Once, twice, then connected, a calm voice answering on the other end, steady, controlled, the kind of voice that did not waste time on unnecessary words. Reyes, he said quietly, turning slightly so his back faced the main floor, his voice low enough to be swallowed by the ambient noise. I need you to check something for me. He paused, glancing back over his shoulder, eyes landing briefly on Arthur as the old man guided the mop along the same measured path, unchanged, unaffected. Do we have any records, old ones, anything classified, involving a unit marking that looks like a partial arc, thick line, positioned high on the neck, not standard issue, not recognized in current registry? There was a short silence on the other end, not confusion, but processing, the kind that came with experience, and then a response, measured, careful. Reyes listened without interrupting, his expression tightening just slightly, not in alarm, but in confirmation, because the tone alone told him enough. And when the voice on the other end finally asked, "Why are you asking?" Reyes did not answer right away. He simply looked back across the gym again, at the man no one else was watching, at the quiet figure moving through a room full of noise as if he existed on a different frequency entirely. Because, Reyes said finally, his voice steady but lower now. I think we have someone here who should not be invisible. And he ended the call before anything more could be said, slipping the phone back into his pocket as the weight of what he had just set in motion settled in. Subtle, but undeniable. Like a shift in pressure before a storm, and across the room, Arthur Hale dipped the mop into the bucket again, wrung it out with the same precise motion, and continued exactly as before, as if nothing had changed, even though everything already had. The call ended, but its echo did not. It lingered in the quiet space behind Reyes's eyes as he stood there for a moment longer, watching Arthur move with the same steady rhythm, the same unbroken pattern, as if time itself bent slightly around him, and Reyes knew that what he had just set in motion would not stay quiet for long, because systems like this did not ignore anomalies, especially not ones that carried the kind of signature he had just described. Across the gym, nothing had changed on the surface. Ryan was back under the bar, counting reps out loud, his voice sharp and confident, the others moving through their routines with practiced intensity, the room alive with effort and noise. But beneath it, something subtle had shifted, something only a few would ever notice, the kind of shift that came when a question had been asked in the right place at the wrong time. Arthur continued along the perimeter, the mop tracing clean lines across the floor, his posture unchanged, his breathing even, his presence still blending into the background for everyone except the one man now watching him with a different set of eyes. Reyes moved again, not toward Arthur this time, but toward the exit at the far side of the gym, his pace measured, his expression neutral, but his mind already running ahead, mapping possibilities, replaying fragments of memory, the symbol, the placement, the age of the ink, and most of all the way Arthur carried himself. Not like a man who had something to prove, but like a man who had already proven it long ago and no longer needed anyone to recognize it. The door opened with a soft push and closed just as quietly behind him, cutting off the noise of the gym and replacing it with the cooler, more controlled air of the hallway, where everything felt more contained, more deliberate, and Reyes pulled his phone out again, not hesitating this time, dialing a different number, one that bypassed the usual layers. One that connected directly to someone who did not deal in speculation. The line picked up almost immediately, no greeting, just a presence on the other end, and Reyes spoke without preamble, his voice low but precise. I need confirmation on a legacy marking, off registry, possibly pre-standardization, tied to black operations units, late 70s to early 80s, placement on the neck, partial arc design. There was a pause, longer this time. Not uncertainty, but weight. And when the response came, it carried that weight with it. Each word measured, each silence. Intentional. Reyes listened, his jaw tightening just slightly as pieces began to align. Not fully, not yet, but enough to remove doubt, enough to replace it with something far more serious. And when the voice on the other end asked for a name, Reyes looked back toward the gym door, as if the answer might be written on the other side. No name on record. He said quietly, but he is here, on base, working as support staff. Another pause, heavier now, and then a single instruction, calm but absolute, the kind that did not need to be repeated. Reyes ended the call and stood there for a moment, the hallway suddenly feeling narrower, the air a little heavier, because whatever Arthur Hale had been, whatever that mark represented, it was not something that stayed buried without reason. And it was not something that could be ignored once recognized. Back inside the gym, Arthur lifted the mop again, guiding it along the same path, the water catching the light in faint reflections that disappeared as quickly as they formed, his movements unchanged, his presence still quiet, still unassuming, and Ryan dropped the bar once more with a satisfied exhale, completely unaware that the simple moment he had already dismissed was beginning to unfold into something far larger than anything he had trained for, something that would not announce itself, with noise or force, but with a silence that would carry far more weight than anything in that room. The hallway remained quiet for a moment after Reyes lowered his hand, the faint hum of overhead lights filling the space where voices had just carried weight, and then it happened, not with noise, not with urgency, but with movement, a shift in rhythm that could only be noticed if you knew what normal felt like, because two men in uniform appeared at the far end of the corridor, not running, not rushed, but walking with a precision that made their presence immediately distinct from everyone else on base. Their steps measured, their expressions neutral, their attention fixed ahead, and Reyes did not need to see insignia to understand that this was already moving beyond routine. He straightened slightly, not in alarm, but in recognition, and as they approached, one of them gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, enough to confirm that the call had reached exactly where it needed to go, and nothing more was said, because nothing more was required. Inside the gym, the noise continued. Steady and unaware, Ryan was halfway through another set, counting under his breath, his focus locked on the bar above him, while the others moved through their rotations, unaware that the perimeter of their world had just been quietly redrawn. Arthur was near the far side now, guiding the mop along the base of a rack, his movements unchanged, the same controlled pace, the same deliberate precision, as if the passage of time had no influence on the way he worked, and for anyone watching without context, he remained exactly what he appeared to be, a quiet man doing a simple job. The door to the gym opened without force, just a smooth push, and the two men stepped inside, their presence subtle but immediately felt, not because they announced themselves, but because the air seemed to adjust around them, conversations lowering just slightly, movements slowing by a fraction, the kind of instinctive reaction that comes when authority enters a space without needing to declare it. Ryan did not notice at first. He finished his set, racked the bar with a controlled exhale, and only then did he glance toward the entrance, his expression shifting briefly as he registered unfamiliar faces, but not enough to concern him, not yet, because nothing about the moment looked like it involved him. Reyes entered a second later, his pace matching theirs, and his eyes moved immediately to Arthur, tracking him with a quiet focus, while the two men did the same, their attention narrowing, scanning, confirming, and when one of them saw the edge of the tattoo as Arthur turned slightly to rinse the mop, there was a subtle change, not visible to most, but unmistakable to anyone trained to read it, a tightening of posture, a sharpening of awareness, a silent acknowledgement that what they were looking at was real. Arthur straightened slowly, the bucket settling with a soft sound against the floor, and for the first time since he had entered the room that morning, he did not immediately return to his task. Instead he paused, just briefly, as if he felt the shift before he saw it, as if he recognized the weight of attention that had just settled on him, and when he lifted his gaze, it was not searching, not uncertain, but calm, steady, meeting the moment without resistance. Around them, the gym continued, but softer now, less certain, because even without understanding why, the room could feel that something had changed, something quiet but undeniable, and Ryan, still standing near the rack, washed with a faint crease in his brow, not yet aware of what was unfolding, but no longer completely sure that the man he had laughed at was as simple as he had assumed, and in that growing stillness, the distance between what was seen and what was real began to close, one silent step at a time. No one gave an order, but the room began to slow anyway, like a machine losing momentum without anyone touching the controls, conversations thinning out into shorter exchanges, weights returning to racks with less force, eyes shifting more often toward the same quiet point near the far side of the gym, where Arthur stood with the mop resting lightly in his hands. And the two men who had entered did not rush him. They approached with a measured pace, each step deliberate, their attention fixed, not on his face at first, but on the side of his neck where the faded ink curved just beneath the collar. And when they stopped a few feet away, there was no challenge in their posture, no demand, just a presence that carried recognition without needing to say it out loud. Arthur met their gaze without hesitation, his expression unchanged, calm in a way that did not come from indifference but from familiarity, as if this moment had happened before in different places, under different lights, with different people who eventually understood the same thing. One of the men shifted slightly, not stepping forward, but adjusting his stance just enough to bring himself into a more formal posture, and his voice, when it came, was low and precise. "Sir," he said, the word simple, but it cut through the remaining noise in the room with a clarity that made several heads turn immediately. because it did not match what everyone thought they were looking at. Ryan felt at first, not understanding it, but feeling the shift like a pressure change, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked from the two men to Arthur, trying to reconcile the tone with the image, and failing. Arthur did not respond right away. He held their gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not as acknowledgement of authority, but as recognition of it, a subtle difference that only a few in the room could even begin to understand. Reyes stood just behind them now, his eyes steady, watching the exchange unfold exactly as he had expected, the final confirmation no longer needed, because the reaction alone was enough. The second man spoke next, his voice equally controlled. "We need to verify something," he said, but there was no interrogation in it, no doubt, just a formality, a step in a process that had already reached its conclusion, and Arthur shifted the mop slightly, resting it against the bucket with a soft, hollow sound before straightening fully, his shoulders settling into a posture that seemed to change nothing and everything at the same time. The quiet janitor still there, but something else now, unmistakably present beneath it. The gym had nearly gone silent, not completely, but enough that every small sound carried farther than it should, the faint hum of ventilation, the soft creak of equipment, the subtle shift of boots on rubber flooring, and in that quiet, the distance between assumption and reality collapsed entirely, leaving only what was true in front of them. Ryan took a step forward without realizing it, drawn by something he could not name, his earlier confidence now, replaced with a tight uncertainty, his eyes fixed on Arthur as if seeing him for the first time. And Arthur finally spoke, his voice the same low, even tone it had always been, but now carrying a weight that had not been visible before. "You already did," he said, and the words settled into the room with a finality that did not need explanation, because in that moment, everyone understood, not the details, not the history, but the fact that whatever stood in front of them had never been what it appeared to be, and the silence that followed was not confusion, it was recognition. The words did not echo, but they settled, heavy and final, like something that had been waiting a long time to be spoken out loud. And for a moment no one moved, not because they were ordered to stop, but because something deeper had taken hold, something instinctive that told them this was no longer a normal interaction, no longer a routine day inside a training facility built on precision and control. The two men in front of Arthur exchanged a brief glance, not confusion, but confirmation. The kind that passed between professionals who understood the same language without needing to say it. And then, almost in unison, their posture shifted, straighter, sharper, a subtle but unmistakable transition into something formal, something deliberate, and one of them took a half step forward before stopping again, as if recognizing that even that small movement required permission now. Arthur did not change, not in any obvious way. His stance remained relaxed, his shoulders loose, his hands at his sides, but there was a stillness around him that felt anchored, like everything in the room had begun to orbit a center that no one had noticed until it was too late to ignore. Reyes watched closely, his earlier uncertainty gone, replaced by a quiet certainty that carried its own weight, his eyes moving from Arthur to the two men and back again, tracking every detail, every shift in posture, every unspoken signal, and behind him, the rest of the gym had fallen into a near silence that felt almost unnatural, the kind that did not come from rules, but from realization. Ryan stood frozen where he was, his arms still slightly flexed from his last set, his breathing slowing as his mind struggled to catch up, the easy confidence that had filled him earlier now replaced with something tighter, something unfamiliar, because the tone in that single word, sir, had not been respect given out of courtesy. It had been respect rooted in something deeper, something earned long before Ryan had ever stepped into a place like this. One of the men spoke again, his voice lower now, more careful. "We have been looking for confirmation on that marking for a long time," he said, each word measured, as if he understood the weight of what he was acknowledging, and Arthur's gaze held steady, not proud, not defensive, just present, as if the past being referenced was not something he needed to revisit, but something he had simply never left behind. A faint shift of fabric at his collar revealed the tattoo again, more clearly now, the dark arc worn by time, but still unmistakable to those who knew what it represented, and Reyes felt the final piece settle into place in his mind, not just a symbol, but a legacy, something that had been deliberately erased from records, but not from reality. Sir, the second man said, the word coming with even more weight this time. Command has been notified, and that sentence, simple as it was, carried a ripple through the room, because even those who did not understand the details understood the implication that whatever this was had already moved beyond this space, beyond this moment, into something larger. Arthur gave a small nod, not an acknowledgement of authority, but an acceptance of the process, and then, without urgency, without hesitation, he reached for the mop again, lifting it from where it rested against the bucket, his movements as calm and controlled as they had been from the beginning, as if none of this required him to change what he was doing. And that, more than anything else, was what settled over the room like a weight. Because the realization was no longer just that he was not who they thought he was, but that he had never needed them to know, and Ryan, standing there in the quiet, felt something shift inside him that no amount of training could have prepared him for. The understanding that respect was not something you gave based on what you saw, but something you recognized when it was already there, long before you noticed it. No one told the room to stand still, but it did anyway, not in perfect formation, not in rehearsed discipline, but in something quieter, something heavier, the kind of stillness that comes when every person present understands they are witnessing something they were never meant to interrupt. Arthur moved the mop forward again, the soft sound of water against the floor cutting through the silence more clearly than any voice could. His steps measured, unhurried, as if nothing about the moment required him to adjust, as if this had always been his pace, regardless of who was watching. And the two men who had addressed him did not follow, did not press. They simply stepped back, creating space, not out of hesitation, but out of respect that had already been decided before they walked into the room. Reyes stood off to the side, his posture steady, his eyes no longer searching but settled, the question answered, the weight of it now fully understood, and he gave a small nod to the two men, a silent confirmation that what needed to happen next would happen beyond this room, beyond this moment, in places where names and histories were handled differently. Ryan remained where he was, his hands hanging at his sides now, no longer clenched, no longer ready, just still, his earlier words replaying in his mind with a clarity that felt sharper than any command he had ever been given. And for the first time since he had stepped into that gym, he did not see Arthur as part of the background. He saw him as the center of something he could not fully grasp, something that made every assumption he had made feel incomplete. Arthur reached the end of the row and paused, the mop resting lightly against the floor as he looked down at the clean surface, not inspecting it, not evaluating it, just acknowledging the work in front of him. And then he turned slightly, his gaze lifting just enough to pass over the room, not lingering on any one person, but taking in everything with a quiet awareness that felt far older than the building itself. For a brief moment, his eyes met Ryan's, and there was no accusation there, no lesson delivered, just a calm recognition, the kind that did not demand understanding but offered it anyway. And Ryan felt his posture shift without thinking, his shoulders straightening slightly, his chin lowering just enough, not because he had been told to, but because something in him understood that this was the only response that made sense. The gym remained quiet, not empty, but changed, the usual rhythm replaced with something more deliberate, more aware, and as Arthur lowered his gaze again and resumed his steady path, the room did not return to what it had been before, because it could not after the line between what was seen and what was real had been erased so completely. The two men turned and moved toward the exit, with the same measured precision they had entered with, Reyes following a step behind, and the door closed softly, leaving the space as it had been, yet entirely different, and Ryan finally exhaled, a slow breath he had not realized he was holding, his eyes still fixed on the quiet figure moving across the floor. And in that silence, the lesson settled without words, without orders, without force. That respect is not something you assign based on rank or role. It is something that exists long before you recognize it. And sometimes, the only difference between ordinary and legendary is whether or not you were paying attention.